Imagine a world where every glacier, every ice sheet, every frozen cap on Earth suddenly melted away. Not in some distant future, not in hundreds of years, but here and now. Overnight, 26 million cubic kilometers of ice turned to water, rushing into our oceans with unstoppable force. This isn't a movie script, this isn't a dystopian novel, it's the blunt reality of physics and geography. If all ice melted, the sea level would rise by around 70 meters. To understand what that means, forget about small coastal floods or a few beaches disappearing. Think instead of New York, London, Shanghai, Mumbai, and entire countries like the Netherlands, Bangladesh, and island nations such as the Maldives vanishing underwater. Overnight, billions of people would become climate refugees. But this isn't just about land disappearing, it's about the entire order of civilization being smashed and rebuilt from the ground up. The first turning point is obvious, the collapse of coastlines. The world's most powerful cities, economic hubs, cultural icons, are all built near the sea. From Los Angeles to Hong Kong, they would be erased. Where Wall Street once stood would now be an underwater graveyard. Where the British Parliament debates laws, waves would crash through stained glass windows. Where the Vatican attracts millions of pilgrims, only the dome would peak above the flood, like a surreal monument to faith swallowed by nature. Humanity has built its strength around oceans, but in a world without ice, oceans would claim their revenge. Think about the consequences for power structures. The U.S. military has bases along coastlines, many of them strategic, like Norfolk in Virginia, which houses the largest naval base in the world. Gone. Submarines, aircraft carriers, entire fleets stranded inland or drowned. China's coastal megacities and ports, the lifeblood of its economy, gone. Russia's Arctic military advantage? Useless, the ice it relies on no longer exists. We're not just talking about an environmental disaster. We're talking about a total redrawing of the global map of military dominance. Wars wouldn't be fought over ideology anymore, they would be fought for high ground, for arable land, for fresh water. And what about religion? Faith thrives in certainty, in stories of divine order. But what happens when the flood isn't biblical myth but physical fact? When St. Peter's Basilica is underwater, when Mecca is uninhabitable due to new desert heat, when the Ganges, sacred to Hindus, is drowned under salt water? How do you preach eternal truth when the very ground beneath believers disappears? One thing is certain, religion would either collapse entirely under the weight of reality, or mutate into something harsher, more radical, feeding off fear and desperation. A drowned world doesn't leave space for gentle sermons, it fuels apocalyptic cults promising salvation to the hopeless. And the police? Law enforcement in coastal nations would simply disintegrate. No police force can control millions of starving, displaced people. Chaos would erupt in every flooded capital. Imagine New York police trying to keep order when 10 million people are pushed north, looting for food and shelter. Imagine European forces attempting to stop refugees when half of Europe's own cities are sinking. The thin blue line would snap. Armies wouldn't be fighting foreign enemies, they'd be trying, and failing, to contain their own people. People underestimate how fragile modern society is. We think technology, democracy, or money will save us. But none of these can stop water. None of them can stop the collapse of food chains, when salt water invades farmland and droughts replace fertile seasons. If the ice melts, we don't just lose land. We lose certainty. We lose order. And in that vacuum, something darker will rise. This isn't fearmongering. It's geography, mathematics, physics. This is what the world would become if all ice melted. Not tomorrow, but in one radical shift. And the most shocking truth is this: humanity is completely unprepared. If you want to know what happens next, what happens to governments, armies, religions, and ordinary people as this nightmare unfolds, make sure you subscribe right now. You don't want to miss what comes after this, because it only gets darker. Now imagine the aftermath, not just the moment of collapse. Picture the second week after the oceans rose by 70 meters. The initial shock has passed, skyscrapers half submerged, highways disappearing into the sea, airports turned into reefs. Humanity wakes up to an unrecognizable map. Entire countries are gone, erased from the atlas. The Maldives, Kiribati, Tuvalu, gone forever. Bangladesh, home to more than 170 million people, gone. Egypt's Nile Delta, gone. This is not migration. This is erasure. Where do those people go? The answer is brutal: nowhere. Borders would slam shut. Every government would turn inward, hoarding resources, militarizing borders, pushing back the human tide. Refugees wouldn't just be unwanted, they would be treated as invaders. Economics would collapse within days. Think of how dependent the world is on ports. 90% of global trade moves by sea. Shanghai, the busiest port in the world, underwater. Rotterdam, gone. Singapore, the lifeline of Asia, erased. The world economy doesn't just shrink, it implodes. Stock markets cease to exist because the cities that host them no longer exist. Currencies become meaningless when food can't be imported. Gold won't save you. Bitcoin won't save you. What has value now is food, clean water, safe land. Barter economies return with a vengeance, not in remote villages but in Paris, in Tokyo, in Los Angeles. Civilization slides backward in a single generation. But food itself becomes the next battleground. With rising seas comes saltwater intrusion into fertile lands. The world's breadbaskets, the American Midwest, Europe's plains, China's river valleys, are no longer stable. Heat waves turn crops to dust. Fisheries collapse because ocean currents are disrupted without polar ice. The Gulf Stream weakens or halts, plunging Europe into bitter winters while Asia swelters in unbearable heat. Starvation becomes the new global epidemic. And when people are hungry, they don't sit quietly, they revolt. Governments would fracture. Democracies, already fragile, would be among the first to fail. Elections mean nothing when your house is underwater. Parliaments dissolve into chaos. Dictatorships would thrive, at least temporarily, because iron control is the only way to manage desperate populations. The world would shift rapidly toward authoritarianism, where survival trumps freedom. Forget human rights. Forget civil liberties. In a world without ice, freedom of speech means nothing when you're speaking to an empty stomach. And the army? Don't think of it as a shield anymore. Armies would become the largest gangs in history. Whoever controls the guns controls the food, the land, the remaining fresh water. Nuclear weapons wouldn't disappear, but what good is a nuclear strike when the target is already underwater? Power would come not from missiles but from control of mountain ranges, river sources, and farmland. The new global capitals wouldn't be New York, Beijing, or London, they'd be cities like Denver, Addis Ababa, and Ulaanbaatar. High-altitude sanctuaries suddenly become the new centers of civilization. But don't think for a moment this would be peaceful. When billions are on the move, when entire religions lose their holy lands, when borders collapse, violence becomes the default. Police vanish because law is meaningless without stability. Instead, warlords rise. New religions rise. Entire ideologies rise out of chaos. A drowned world doesn't just remake geography, it remakes morality. What you thought was good or evil, right or wrong, dissolves with the coastlines. And here's the darkest twist, this isn't pure fantasy. The last time Earth had no ice was about 34 million years ago. The sea level really was 70 meters higher. The planet didn't care then, and it won't care now. Nature doesn't negotiate. Humanity, on the other hand, negotiates itself into extinction with every year of denial. The ice is melting already. The process is slower than the nightmare I just described, but it's happening, piece by piece, glacier by glacier. And once it reaches a tipping point, there is no going back. The only question is, will we collapse slowly, or will we collapse all at once? Let's push further. We've seen the coastline swallowed, the ports destroyed, the governments shaken. But now comes the real fracture, the psychological and cultural collapse. Because when the ground beneath your feet vanishes, when maps are rewritten overnight, humanity doesn't just lose territory. It loses meaning. Think about identity. For centuries, nations have built their pride on their land, their symbols, their monuments. But what happens when those monuments vanish? The Statue of Liberty, drowned. The pyramids of Giza, buried under salt water. The Taj Mahal, swallowed by floods. These aren't just stones and bricks, they're anchors of identity, erased in a single sweep. Nations built on thousands of years of history would face an existential void. And when identity collapses, extremism fills the gap. New radical movements would rise, promising to restore what was lost, even though nothing can be restored. Imagine cult leaders convincing millions that floods are punishment from God, or conspiracy movements preaching that only they know the way to salvation. Religion itself would be ripped apart. Rome's Vatican, drowned. Jerusalem, cut off in chaos. Mecca, uninhabitable in the brutal heat. Faith would either radicalize beyond recognition or die altogether. Picture priests and imams calling for holy wars, not against other religions, but against governments that failed their people. Picture masses abandoning centuries-old traditions, turning instead to violent new sects that thrive on despair. A world without ice wouldn't be secular, it would be fanatically religious, in ways that are both unpredictable and terrifying. And then comes the army, not as a shield, but as the new ruling class. Military leaders would carve territories like gang lords, offering protection in exchange for loyalty. Forget the Geneva Conventions, humanitarian law disappears when food is worth more than gold. Soldiers would no longer fight wars in deserts or jungles, they would fight in mountain passes, in caves, on the last remaining plateaus where life is possible. Armies wouldn't serve governments. Governments would serve armies. Meanwhile, police, once symbols of domestic order, would be obsolete. The sheer scale of displacement would make law enforcement laughable. Tens of millions of refugees storming borders. No police force can control that. Instead, private militias, corporations, and even religious factions would replace the police. Imagine corporations like Amazon or Tesla running their own private security forces, controlling not technology but food and shelter. In the absence of government, they become states themselves. Let's not ignore science. In a world without ice, scientists wouldn't be celebrated heroes, they'd be scapegoats. People don't like hard truths when they're starving. You knew about climate change, they would scream, and you did nothing. Scientists, researchers, climate activists, they'd be hunted, silenced, blamed for humanity's downfall. The very people who warned us would be the first to be punished. This is how desperate societies behave, they destroy their prophets. And the daily life of ordinary people? Forget smartphones, forget Instagram, forget YouTube. Electricity grids collapse as power plants drown. Internet cables, lying on ocean floors, are destroyed. Humanity slides into digital darkness. No news, no communication, no entertainment. You're not scrolling on TikTok anymore, you're bartering bread in a refugee camp, fighting to keep your children alive in the mud. The comfort of modern life, everything we take for granted, erased overnight. And here's the cruelest truth, this wouldn't unite humanity. It wouldn't bring us together. It would tear us apart. Borders would harden, wars would multiply, hatred would deepen. Instead of one human family, it would be every tribe, every faction, every desperate group for itself. And in that chaos, humanity would show its true face, not noble, not compassionate, but brutal, animalistic, and selfish. This is the world without ice, a battlefield, not a paradise. And the deeper we go into this nightmare, the clearer it becomes that we are not prepared, not politically, not spiritually, not technologically. If you want to see how this story ends, how humanity either collapses or claws its way back from the brink, make sure you subscribe right now. Because the final chapters will shock you. We've seen the collapse of cities, the death of identity, the rise of military rule. But what happens when humanity adapts? Because even in catastrophe, people don't just vanish. They rebuild, but in this new world, adaptation looks nothing like progress. It looks like survival carved out of desperation. First, geography decides who lives and who dies. Mountain regions suddenly become the most valuable real estate on Earth. The Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes, once playgrounds for tourists, are now overcrowded lifeboats for entire nations. Cities like Denver, Addis Ababa, and Mexico City become new global hubs, not because they're rich, but because they're dry and high enough to survive. Humanity abandons the old coastal capitals and builds crude new ones on the ridges of mountains. But don't imagine gleaming skyscrapers rising from the rocks, think overcrowded slums, endless tent cities, disease spreading through unwashed camps. The centers of power shrink to fortified enclaves, surrounded by seas of misery. Second, technology bends in terrifying directions. Forget consumer electronics. Forget luxury. In a drowned world, innovation serves only one master: control. Drones patrol refugee camps, armed with tear gas and rubber bullets. AI doesn't recommend movies anymore, it tracks and predicts unrest, deciding which protest to crush before it begins. Biotechnology doesn't heal, it creates drought-resistant crops sold at impossible prices by corporations that now act as governments. The old dream of progress is perverted. Science becomes a weapon. Third, the environment itself becomes an unpredictable enemy. Without ice sheets to reflect sunlight, the Earth absorbs more heat. Temperatures soar. Storms grow to monstrous sizes, slamming into fragile refugee settlements with biblical force. Entire regions become uninhabitable, parts of Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East turn into literal furnaces. Migration isn't a choice anymore, it's a law of survival. And every new wave of migration sparks wars in the regions that can still support life. The planet itself becomes a weapon, striking with heat, floods, and chaos, and humans are powerless to stop it. And let's talk about morality. In this world, kindness is not rewarded, it's punished. Sharing food means starving with your neighbor. Helping a stranger means betraying your family. Humanity's moral compass shatters, replaced by raw instinct. Communities that survive are the ones that become ruthless, disciplined, merciless. Compassion becomes a luxury no one can afford. What we called civilization becomes nothing more than organized cruelty. Now think about the elites, the billionaires, the politicians, the old rulers of the world. Do you think they'll sink with the rest of us? Of course not. They'll retreat to fortified compounds in Greenland, New Zealand, or Antarctica's last dry land. They'll build bunkers, protected by private armies, and watch as billions suffer. For them, the melted world becomes a stage for ultimate inequality, a handful living in artificial comfort, billions trapped in endless struggle. The gap between rich and poor isn't just economic anymore, it's existential. One group survives as gods, the other as expendable masses. But history shows something important: desperate people don't stay silent forever. Revolutions would ignite, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Masses would storm elite enclaves, willing to die just to drag their oppressors down with them. This wouldn't be democracy, this wouldn't be liberation, it would be revenge, raw and unfiltered. Humanity in this phase becomes unrecognizable. The promise of progress is gone. What's left is rage. And here's the chilling realization: this isn't centuries away. The first signs are already visible: climate refugees in Africa, saltwater creeping into Asian rice fields, heat waves that kill tens of thousands in Europe. The ice doesn't need to melt all at once to create this future. Piece by piece, year by year, it's already happening. We're not looking at science fiction, we're looking at tomorrow's headlines. So the question is no longer if. The question is when. And when it comes, who will you be? A survivor clinging to the last scraps of land, or someone who saw it coming and still did nothing? Now we reach the end game. A world without ice is not just a world remade, it's a world unrecognizable. Humanity would not collapse all at once, but in layers, like a building burning from the inside. At first, it's the coastlines. Then the cities. Then the nations. Finally, it's civilization itself. And when the dust settles, or rather, when the waters rise, what's left is not progress, not unity, not redemption. What's left is survival, stripped of every illusion we once held. Let's imagine the daily reality in this drowned earth. Waking up in a camp at the edge of a mountain plateau, the air thick with smoke from thousands of cooking fires. You hear the hum of drones above, not delivering packages, but scanning for unrest. You line up for water, rationed by armed guards who treat you less like citizens and more like cattle. Money means nothing here. Your value is measured in labor, in obedience, in silence. Meanwhile, the old powers, nations, corporations, religions, mutate into grotesque forms. Governments no longer exist to serve the people, they exist to control what's left. Corporations don't sell you products, they own your food, your medicine, your air. Religion doesn't preach peace, it preaches obedience, demanding loyalty in exchange for hope. Every institution humanity once trusted becomes corrupted, weaponized against the desperate billions who no longer have a choice. And yet, not everyone will survive. Most won't. Billions will starve, drown, or die in wars over scraps of habitable land. The survivors will be hardened, ruthless, molded by cruelty into something new. Future generations will not look like us, think like us, or believe what we believe. They will not dream of freedom, democracy, or equality. They will dream only of safety, of food, of another day alive. Humanity doesn't vanish, it evolves into something harsher, colder, stripped of ideals. That's the true horror of this scenario, not extinction, but transformation. Now here's the paradox that should terrify you most. This world, as brutal and unforgiving as it is, would still function. There would still be rulers and ruled. There would still be armies, religions, and systems of control. Civilization would not disappear, it would mutate. And once that mutation takes hold, there is no going back. The human story, as we know it, would be over. A new one begins, written not in ink or code, but in hunger, violence, and fear. So ask yourself, what side of that story would you be on? Would you be one of the elites, hiding in mountain fortresses while billions drown? Would you be one of the desperate, clawing for survival in endless refugee camps? Or would you be one of the millions swept away in the first waves, forgotten before the world even fully collapsed? This is not a hypothetical future dreamed up to scare you. This is a scientific inevitability if the ice truly melts. Physics doesn't care about politics. Geography doesn't care about prayers. The planet will reshape itself, whether we like it or not. And when it does, all the illusions we cling to, our nations, our beliefs, our technologies, will mean absolutely nothing. We began this journey with a simple thought: imagine a world where all ice melted. Now you've seen where that road leads: drowned cities, fractured nations, corrupted religions, endless wars, and a humanity remade into something unrecognizable. So here's the final question, the one that matters most: knowing this, what should we do now? Deny it until it's too late? Or finally face the reality and act before the waters rise? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what topic you want me to uncover next. Because if this vision shocked you, just wait until you hear what happens in the other scenarios waiting on our horizon.